So we're getting closer and closer to Rosh Hashanah. We're less than 2 weeks away from Rosh Hashanah. And the last thing we're feeling right now is renewal, freshness. And yet, it's the zone. It's the moment. It's the moment that the year renews and that God decides on a new energy for the world. Each year has its own energy. For those who are on our Tanya course, we've been discussing it in the past few days, the idea that every 12 months, God recreates a new energy. To live with that, to appreciate that this new year of 5782 can be a totally different year than 5781 with entirely new energy is hard, because the world seems to just be going on its own clock. Rosh Hashanah in, Rosh Hashanah out, who cares? But this world is being sustained, not only sustained, it's being vitalized by God. So today I want to talk to you about God, because Rosh Hashanah is all about crowning Hashem as our king. And we've explored various dimensions, but God is pretty much everything. So you can never stop talking about God. And I feel that we really need to talk about it, because we all, I believe, all of us or most of us believe in Hashem. But we're not actually sure what we believe, who we believe in, and what we believe about them. It's 2 points. Number one, who do you believe exists? In other words, what is that God? And how do they interact with the world? How do they interact with your life? In other words, what do you believe about them? Now that you agreed on a God that exists, what do you believe about them? What do you believe exists or doesn't exist? And that's it's a tough subject, but I believe it's extremely important. What do you believe about God? Do you believe that it's gendered? He? Do you believe he has, if we go with he, God has a look, a style? One day we will see him. What will he look like? When you talk to God, where is he? In the heavens. What does that mean? I've always laughed when I heard that when the first astronaut, who was actually a cosmonaut from Russia, went up to space, Yuri Gagarin, he landed and they said, "No, so how was it?" He said, "I looked all over space and I didn't see God." In other words, because communism was pure atheism. So I went up to heaven and I didn't find a God. Mazel tov. Didn't find a God. And for him, I always thought God was in the heavens, and I flew up to heaven and I didn't see God. So God doesn't exist. So simple, so obvious, so convenient. But here's the truth. Whoever said that God is something you can see? As a child, we try to give an imagery to a child, and the child conjures up in their mind this imagery of a long white beard and a Santa Claus. I say always Santa Claus is like the perfect image of what most people think God looks like. A bit overweight, bit of an angry character, bit of a vengeful character, but also very sweet and warm and fuzzy, and sits you on the lap and gives you sweets and sometimes gives you a slap. A bit of an inappropriate Santa Claus. Those days Santa Claus could sit you on the lap. Today it's a bit creep. So like a bit of a creepy version, but not creepy because he's God. of Santa Claus. And I get why we do it. It's not because we're silly or idiotic. It's because we struggle to accept that which we cannot see. Not only that we cannot see in our physical eyes, there's a lot of things we accept that we can't see. I don't see the internet waves coming through us, but I am talking on Zoom and you are hearing me. What we struggle to is something that we cannot see with our mind's eye. In other words, we cannot even comprehend. Technology, we could at least, even if we're not, tech geeks, we can acknowledge that there's a thing called code and that there's currents and electricity and vibrancies and God knows what in the World Wide Web. And we know that if we dig deep enough, we could get our head around it. It's not mind-boggling. It might be hard for us to understand, but it is comprehensible, right? If I don't understand it, at least Einstein understands it. Someone gets it. So I might not be able to explain Einstein's theories, but someone gets it. I can't really understand quantum physics, but there are quantum physicists who get it. I'm not a doctor. I don't understand my biology, but the doctor does. When it comes to God, however, you're in a very strange situation. Why? Because when it comes to Hashem, the mind of a human being cannot wrap its head around it. There might be tzaddikim, but obviously their minds are not, they're a bit less limited than the average human being. But the average human being, no matter how much they try, they cannot conjure who God is. What it can do is see God's work. So they see the world and they say there must be a God. They see love and they say there must be a God. They see a baby, there must be a God. But they still do not understand him. They understand ma'aseh yadav, the accomplishments of his hands. But who he is, in the words of Kabbalah, a human being is capable of hasagat hametziyut, grasping the fact that God's existence is. In other words, he or she could get their head around God's existence, but not hasagas hamahus. But they cannot understand the essence. They cannot understand God's makeup, psychology. They can't understand him. Why? Because your mind is limited to think of everything within time, within space, within your frame of reference. That's the way our mind sees reality, with our frame of reference. That's why the human being cannot get their head around the black hole, for example. How do you accept, according to many scientists, it's more 90% of the universe is black holes, but we know nothing about it. All we know is that gravity gets, that time and space get condensed. So we could say that, we could comprehend its existence, but we cannot get our head around it. How do you get your head around a black hole? What does it mean? What does it mean that time goes, that space-time condensed themselves? They have the imagery that it's a curvature. What does that mean? What is a black hole? How does it work? Why does the world need it? Now, we might understand it one day, but currently with our frames of reference, we have no way of understanding it because we see everything within time and space. Everything is somewhere and something not. Another example, quantum physics. What does quantum physics say? That this and this, tech in theory, are two things that you see as separate, but they're essentially the same. And when you delete one, the other one gets deleted. Not because one's dependent on the other, they're the same thing. Or quantum physics will show that some things are waves at the same time that they're light. Quantum physics in general is a world, if you ever want to believe in God and you want to go through it through science, spend an hour in quantum physics and your mind will be blown. It just, because it even within science, it doesn't make any sense. The world is learning to harness energy. There's things, quantum computing and everything, but to really understand, what do you mean there's two things that are the same thing? It's two things. No, it's the same thing. You're seeing it as two things, but it's really one thing. Or the whole idea that when you, in quantum physics, when you observe something, it starts acting in a way differently than when you don't observe it. In other words, your observation creates reality. Now, again, this is not quack stuff. It's science, quantum physics. But it's a level where the mind just can't get its head around. And that's what's important to understand about Hashem. The reason we conjure up such ridiculous imagery about God is because we struggle to accept, I don't get it. I know God exists. I can maybe even feel the presence of God, but I cannot conjure an imagery. I cannot accept the fact that there's no imagery. I cannot accept the fact that this God is everywhere, is everything, but I cannot see it. It doesn't have a look. Nothing created it. You know, I get this question from every child at some stage. Who created God? Nobody. But what does that mean? Like, we can't accept it. We can't accept the idea that before the world was created, there was no time and no space. Even scientifically, till the Big Bang, there was nothing, but there was something because there was particles there. So what was there? We don't know. What do you mean? What do you mean? So till the particles exploded or till creation happened, it could be that were the same thing. There was no time and no space. What does that mean? What does that mean that the world was just existing? But time's a real thing. So someone could explain you, well, time is dependent on the sun and time is dependent on the moon and et cetera, et cetera. You could say the words, but you don't get it. How is it possible that there's no such thing as time? What is now is different than now. Those were 2 seconds apart. Now is not now, right? That's the way we get our heads around. But what do you mean there's no time? What does that mean? How do you accept that? How do you live with that? How do you embrace that? And therefore, many people say they don't believe in God because they can't get their head around. And that seems to be a reasonable conclusion. It doesn't make sense, so I don't believe in him. In other words, my frame of reference is the only way through which to see reality. And if my head, the modern Western head, does not see it, then it's not existing. Once upon a time, people were spiritual. Some people, there might be some people even today, some people will just, I don't know, they feel it and they almost see it. I'm not that person. For me, God is something I struggle with because I know with 100% certainty it exists, he exists, but I can't get my head around. What do you mean? What do you mean he exists? He's everything. He's within me, but he created me. But I'm just in a facade where I think that this is reality, but ultimately he's the reality. I could say all the words, but my head, whatever, it's limited. It doesn't get it. You know, someone one time asked the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel, the same name as the last Lubavitcher Rebbe, who was his great-great-grandfather. Anyway, he asked him, what's the point of studying Kabbalah, Hasidut, Jewish mysticism? I don't get it anyway. Studying Tanya, I'm hearing all these esoteric concepts. If anyone listened to today's Tanya, it was pretty heavy stuff. Sfirot and Or and Keli, vessel and light, and one is limited and one's not limited. It's like really abstract stuff. What's the point? I don't get it. It's Chinese. And the Tzemach Tzedek said, the difference will be when Mashiach comes, will you be able to say, aha, I get it. In other words, if you studied Jewish mysticism before, then the moment Mashiach comes and God reveals himself in some way, but much more than now, and he unlimits our minds, he unlocks our potential and our frame of reference, you'll be able to look, oh, that's what I learned about. That's Atzilut. That's Chesed. That's God's infinite light. Gosh, okay, there's context. Suddenly, everything I learned makes sense. It's like, for example, someone prepares to go on a trip. They go in the front. Okay, so they study stuff, but it's still all abstract. And suddenly it's like, aha, I get it. Okay, now that I'm in France, I get it. Okay, yeah. You told me I would feel something by the palace. You told me I would feel something by the tower. I get it now. A better example. Before marriage, you could sit there talking to a person and give them 5,000 courses on marriage. They have no idea what you're talking about. They get married and suddenly, aha, I now understand. I get it. Someone talks to you about a child and the love you have for a child. You never had a child. You don't know what they're talking about. It's Chinese. You could say all the words. You could repeat their words verbatim like a parrot, but you have no idea what they're talking about. You have your first child. You hold them in your arms and you get it. That's what learning about spirituality is. Now we're just learning a taste of God, of godliness, but we don't get it. There's no aha. It's not like, oh, we've been talking all about the four worlds, Atzilut, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiyah, and each one of them with its 10 faculties, and the one of them has angels, and the other one is a place of nothingness, all this abstract stuff. I'm like, oh my gosh, like so boring. Some people are loving the Tanya, and some people are struggling. Like I look at the amount of listening. I can't see who listens to voice notes, but I could see who listens to the Spotify. The average Tanya class gets 2 on Spotify. I'm sure there's many more people who listen on the podcast, on the audio. And the Chumash gets 15. So based on that, I could frame a reference what the numbers are, not recording. And I get it. The Chumash, at least whatever, some of the stuff is hard to comprehend. Kill this person, rape victim, that, but at least the Chumash is Torah that you could get your head around. You could understand. It's frame of reference. You might be uncomfortable with some of the policies and laws and you need explanation, but it's within your frame of reference, the actual 5 books. But you come to Tanya or any book of Jewish mysticism, and unless you're a spiritual seeker, you're saying, my God, as if I care. The light that Hashem shines, that surrounds the world, Soivev Kalamin, the light that Hashem shines within the world, Memale Kalamin, the Atzmut, the essence. I could sit there throwing a million words, and it's like, okay, Rabbi, you're trying to prove you're a genius? No, it's not a genius. It's basic Tanya. It's basic stuff. I wish I knew much more. But what it gives me is at least I know what exists. That's why I love Jewish mysticism. I love Chassidut. If you give me an hour and say, study whatever you want, I'll open. The author of the Tanya wrote a very extensive book on the Parshas and the Chagim. It's called Likutei Torah. I'll sit with that. If I get to choose whatever I want, obviously I still study Talmud and I do different things. But what do I enjoy the most? An hour of Likutei Torah. Why? Because I'm getting at least some knowledge about God. I don't get it. I can't place it anywhere, but I'm talking about God, and God is starting to make a little more sense. How the world was created, God's various energies. In other words, if I didn't study Chassidut, if I didn't study Jewish mysticism, I would really be tempted to see God as a Santa Claus, because I have no other way to see him. Now, I have a way to see him even if I don't understand it. When you study this stuff long enough, you develop at least, again, you'll never get it, but you develop a sensitivity that there is so much reality beyond our reality. There's so many levels, there's so many manifestations, there's so many energies that fill the world, and the new light that comes on Rosh Hashanah. For example, if you just want to study Rosh Hashanah in the eyes of Jewish mysticism, it will take you decades. There is so much information. What does it mean that the light of the previous year left and a new light comes? Why does God need us to crown him? What level of within godliness is called upon when we call the shofar? Why did God make Rosh Hashanah dafka on the day that man was created? Why on Yom Tov, Rosh Hashanah that falls on Shabbos, do you not blow the shofar? Don't you need to crown God as a king? This stuff is tens of thousands of pages of deep ideas. And why is it enjoyable? Because the moment you accept that it's real, you want to know about it, even if you can't get it. I don't get quantum physics, but I'm fascinated by it. I don't understand physics, but I'm fascinated. I want to know. It's like, it's broadening my mind to a different reality beyond my frame of reference. You know, until I suffered the loss of my family, I had to counsel other people, and I did the best I can by saying the words. Now I have the aha. But just because, you know, until the tragedy, thank God, I didn't suffer immediate loss, doesn't mean I shouldn't reach out to people who are suffering loss. I might not get them fully, I might not get them at all, but at least I could offer empathy. At least I could try to understand their world. It's beyond my frame of reference. I never suffered loss. I never felt like someone stuck their hand into my heart and ripped it to pieces. I never felt that. But I could listen to it. And by listening to it, I expand myself. I grow. So this is what is so important for each and every one of us. And what I really want to bring home in today's shir. We're crowning God as a king. Just staying ignorant about what God is not an answer. The Santa Claus option is pathetic, right? We all know that. And just saying, I don't get it, it's very hard to build a relationship with something that you have no knowledge about. We need to study godliness. We need to study this stuff. Whether it's abstract or relevant is irrelevant. You know, I remember as a yeshiva student, I hated the Talmud. For many years, I really struggled to open the Talmud. I can't say I'm obsessed with the Talmud now, but I definitely got over my obsessive disrespect for it. Why? Because when I studied Talmud, I had the famous excuse, it's irrelevant, mostly irrelevant. Okay, currently I'm studying the Tractate of Sukkah. It's kind of relevant. But I was studying in the Tractate of Psachim about Pesach, 80% of it was about the laws of purity and impurity. I don't deal with impurity and impurity. The only purity and impurity today that's relevant is when a woman has her, monthly cycle, which is anyways a tractate of its own. It's the Tractate of Nida. And a Kohen going into cemetery, but like all the other stuff, it's so much of Torah is about purity and impurity once you start digging into it. It's the point. It's not relevant to my life. And then there was a moment when suddenly it clicked in me. Torah is not here to be relevant. Torah is here to connect you to God. And whatever is relevant to him, if you love him, becomes relevant to you. In other words, you are grasping God's wisdom when you study his Torah, whether it's a Picha Talmud, whether it's a Mishnah, whether it's a Chumash, whether it's Chassidut, you are grabbing onto God. For some reason, God was passionate about the subject. It means the world to him, and he wants us to know it. And he says, when you are studying this, you and I are becoming one. You are grasping me in your mind. So in other words, Torah is not a self-help book. It can help you, but if Torah is not just a cute book of motivational words that will keep you motivated, and therefore you say, you know what, I'll buy it because it's relevant. So you go into the store and you go to the self-help section and you pick up the newest craze. Why? Because it helps me. But Torah comes and says it's not about self-help, it's about getting your mind to think like God. Why God cares about the cow and the ox and the purity and impurity, I don't know. But that's his mind. And when you get into his mind, you start thinking a little more godly. You could read 1,000 self-help books, but you're still thinking like a human being. You're still thinking within the frame of reference of humanity. But once you open a Torah and you start learning God's wisdom, he elevates you. Again, you'll never see things 100% in God's eye or even 1%, but he elevates you to see it a little more beyond humanity, to see the world through God's perspective. That's why there was always a thing called a Torah Yid. In the shtetl, they used to call someone a Torah Yid. It wasn't just a person who was a genius. There's a lot of geniuses who just read and know everything. But this Yid starts thinking like Torah. Their perspectives are not coming from local culture, from new fads, from every new mishigas that makes it around. It comes from a deeper place. It comes from Torah. I think to myself, the amount of bad ideas out there today, and I'll say it differently. Everyone has opinions throughout history, but today our opinions we are so passionate about. I am pro-vaccine, I am anti-vaccine. I am pro-Trump, I am anti-Trump. I'm pro, Ramaphosa, I'm anti. There's no nuance, it's no thing, I am convinced my opinion's right. We have a world of billions of people, each one convinced that the way they see the world is right. Are any of them right? No. Because they're all, first of all, they're all radicals, and truth is never radical, truth is nuanced. But also they're all seeing the world through one frame of reference, what I feel. I feel Trump is good. I feel he's an idiot. Mazel tov. I feel. I have somebody I know. I actually blocked his WhatsApp. Do you know you could block WhatsApp statuses now? You just press the name for a few seconds and then you just say block and you never see the WhatsApp. And this fellow was posting, he wasn't a total conspiracy theorist. He was okay with a vaccine, but the fact that the government's imposing vaccines, it's like the stars and the Holocaust and just saying this ridiculous stuff. And each day the guy was posting a Holocaust star saying, I'm vaccinated. And I told the guy, I said, cut it out. It's actually annoying. Yeah, but I spoke to a Holocaust survivor who said it's the same thing. I was like, but that's ridiculous. How can, it's comparable, he says. Well, I blocked the guy on WhatsApp because I have no patience to ever read that stuff again. Not that he's going to convince me, but like, I don't even want to see such nonsense. And the person's convinced that it's equal to the beginning of the Holocaust, what we're going through now. And you think he's alone? Nah. Now, is it crazy what some governments are doing? Yes. I got this, I have to load it, it's too funny. I got this WhatsApp, that kind of brought this point across. Some governments are crazy, but we're going crazy if we start thinking without nuance. We're thinking only what I feel. I feel is the dictation of today's policy. Each one of us lives based on how I feel. So my feelings are all that matters. But really? Is that the truth? Is it all about my feelings? Is it all my feelings that matter? Heaven forbid, never. I'll just show it on my phone. It was just kind of funny. It goes like this. You basically see a bunch of Talibaners, and he says, as I said earlier, if you don't like it here, you can always go live in Australia. Go live in Melbourne. Yeah, it's a bit crazy what's going on, but if you continue studying Torah, and this is my final message, if you continue studying Torah, eventually you become a bit above. You start hovering above the nonsense rather than living the nonsense. We can't live in the sewer. We could stay above it. The sewer is here and I have to walk in it, but I have to live in it. Be above. Be above. Shkoyach everybody, l'chaim.